I'm going to buy this class another box of stylus before I leave. Not super expensive.
I'll buy a canvas.
Oh, let me ask him for his we're talking about stylus.
Yeah, let me see. I like my stylus. Who took mine? I'll trade you.
There's some people having issue with this.
Who else wanted a stylus? Alec, come in. Nice catch, dude. Way to go.
Yeah, Olivia. Throw that one.
Yeah.
Throw that one away.
That would you catch it, wouldn't you?
No, I probably
Oh no, don't throw it away.
I was blindsided.
People, a good, reasonably priced Apple pencil knockoff is that link I sent you on Amazon.
Oh, wait, take it off. Why did you here? Take it. Yeah, I'll take it. Why did it like I know. This one is like no. Like comes off in the thing. My word. Just reach here. Go to just made weird.
This one's new.
Can we come around?
Sure. Hey, Brayden, can you give me a thumbs up if you can hear me? I switched to my AirPods. Awesome, thank you.
My sister's
She doesn't need it. I just need something. She's slow.
Dude, I can't. She's snoring.
I know.
Like your hair is like her hair. Like her covered in it. Dude, I'll fit. Next thing I want to see is you go to this.
Nope, I gotta choose. Yeah, I gotta. Give me 1 second.
And then it's not wet. So it should.
Alright, so you guys see that okay? Brayden, another thumbs up. Awesome.
That's the only thing I'll do.
Slippery.
Yeah, so
Thank you.
it should dry out.
Alright. Some stuff before we jump in. Now, I know that this lesson is a little bit difficult. There's a lot of names and people and what they did. So, that's why we're allowing you to do the ID and significance worksheet as I go through this keynote. I'm going to give you enough time to get through every single person, to write down who they are and why they are significant. All I ask is that if I ask you if you need more time, you just let me know. I'm never going to say, no, you're not allowed to have more time, you got to go. I think it's really important that you understand who they all are. Also, if there's any questions on any of them as we go through them, just let me know. It is on. We're going to back it up real quick because it is on. I got it. Alright, another thing about that worksheet. It is for completion. We're expected to turn it in at the end of class. If you fill everyone out, do it to your best ability, you will get 100%. It's a very easy grade for you guys. I know he doesn't provide a lot of those in this class, so yeah.
Mine didn't save, but I have a picture of it.
Okay, I would still, fill some of it out. That's
No,
been
it's
happening
all
to other
done.
people. And it's just extra practice. The goal here is just to give you guys more and more practice so that their names and their significance do get a little bit more easier for you guys to recall. So, today's keynote is on the great minds of the Hellenistic era. Now, I think it's important before we jump into all these people to get some background, to do some review so you understand what allowed these people to kind of flourish, to come up with these great philosophies, to develop all these tools. The word Hellenistic means like the Greeks. So when we think of the Hellenistic era, we think of like the Greek era, meaning were spreading Greek culture all over the place. As you know, Alexander's armies extended Greek rule over a vast region, spreading languages, ideas, art, and architecture through Southwest Asia and Egypt. So the Hellenistic era signified a time in which Greek culture spread to the non-Greek people that Alexander had conquered. As we continue, Alexander sought to unite Macedonia, the Greeks, Egyptians, and Asians under his new empire. However, his dream to do so would be short-lived. And does anybody remember why it was short-lived? What happened? Yeah, go ahead.
Because he died of malaria.
And what gave him malaria?
Mosquitoes.
Exactly. So his dream would be short-lived, and his generals would then divide his empire into 4 separate kingdoms. That was Macedonia, Pergamum, Egypt, and Seleucid. People who served in the governments of these Hellenistic kings were expected to speak Greek, and special treatment was given to those who were Greek or Macedonian. I talked about this in the video lesson. Do you remember why this special treatment was given, or why they were expected to speak Greek? Yeah.
Because Hellenistic era means like the Greeks, and they're trying to replicate Greek culture.
Exactly. You're on point there. The reason it was done was they wanted to control the power. They felt like if they allowed too many cultures to spread, too many languages to occur, that people would build sects and they would want to leave the kingdom. It was a way to keep everybody in control, essentially. So these Hellenistic kings would create new cities and military posts, and this would produce a need for Greek architects, artists, and engineers, in turn spreading Greek culture further into the conquered lands. So as they built these new cities and places, they needed to fill it with great Greek minds, leading to more spread. So we're going to talk about the Hellenistic arts. During the Hellenistic era, philosophers, scientists, poets, and writers would now move to these new Greek cities of Southwest Asia and Europe. Egypt, I apologize. The Greek capital of Alexandria in Egypt serves as such an example to remember why it's called Alexandria. Go ahead, Mustard.
Does Alexander name it?
Yep, he named it after himself, and he would do that with multiple cities along the coast and through Egypt. Scholars would then become attracted to Alexandria's library that held 500,000 scrolls, and its museum where much important research would be conducted throughout history. Alexandria's pictured here still serves as a vital city in Egypt today, with around 4 million people living and working there each year. The architecture during the Hellenistic era played a very important role in expanding Alexander's empire. The kings, like Alexander wanted their new cities to resemble Athens. Athens will be mentioned all the time in Greek history because it was such a beautiful but important place. They also were willing to spend the money to do so. That meant that these kings and other wealthy citizens hired Greek sculptors who would go on to create thousands of statues from many different towns and cities. These sculptures and statues contrasted Greece's golden age statues and sculptures, and do you guys remember why? It's okay if you don't. These statues and sculptures depicted people in more of a realistic style. They expressed emotions such as sadness and anger. Greece's golden age, I've heard multiple people joke about it, they were thick, they were godlike, they were very impressive, boastful statues. Whereas the Hellenistic era statues were more about showing people in a realistic way. We're going to talk about the writers. And honestly, there's not too much to talk when it comes to writers. Hellenistic rulers supported very talented writers. So this support would result in a large amount of literature during the Hellenistic era. Sadly, as over time and as wars would be fought, kingdoms would be claimed, people moved. A lot of this writing was destroyed or burned and just lost to history. However, we do have one such Greek writing from the time that is referenced very often, and that was written by the man Apollonius. Does anybody remember what Apollonius, or who Apollonius was and what he wrote?
He's the last one.
Yeah, it's important to know. The worksheet kind of jumps around a little bit, but he is your last. And yeah,
I don't know how to say it, but
Yes, so Apollonius was a Hellenistic poet who wrote the epic poem of Argonautica. So, as we look at your worksheet real quick, the ID, we got Apollonius. How do we ID him? He was a famous Hellenistic poet. What was his significance? He wrote the poem Argonautica. Does anyone remember from the video and the video inside the video what the poem of Argonautica was about? Yeah.
Mr. Robinson,
Yes, ma'am.
are you having wrestling practice tonight?
I'm having high school, not middle school.
Thank you.
You got it.
Sorry, go ahead.
It was about like how I don't remember his name, but like his dad lost the throne and was taken by, I don't remember, but like, and then he like got a bunch of people to like let him like, cause he had like this hard task that he had to do.
You're in the ballpark. Does anybody else want to add on to that? I'll tell you then. The poem tells the story of Jason and his band of heroes sailing the seas seeking a ram with golden fleece, and along the way they would have many different adventures. Essentially, his uncle had the throne, and Jason wanted to know what he had to do to get the throne from him. His uncle set him on an impossible task to sail the seas and find this ram with golden fleece. Jason called out to the gods and said, "Help me, please." And the gods would lend him some of Greece's mightiest heroes of all time. One, for example, was Hercules. But this poem has seen a lot of modern revisions, and it's often referred to Jason and the Argonauts. So as you go through the ID and significance, it is perfectly fine to say that Apollonius wrote the poem Jason and the Argonauts. It's a little bit easier on you guys to spell. Like I said, I'm going to give you guys the time to get all this written down. It's important that you have practice with it and know it. Zoom people, if you can hear me, and if you have any issues, Mr. Robinson is at his desk, so he can read the chat. Does anybody need more time on this?
Me.
Okay. Just give me a thumbs up when you're ready to go. I should have mentioned before, but when you're talking about the significance, you do not have to do every bullet point verbatim. If you want to shorten it, summarize it, anything that packs it more into a manageable state for you guys, that is perfectly fine. I promise you, Mr. Robinson or I, we're going to understand what you're trying to say. While we're sitting here, what did you guys think of the video? Was it alright? Good? Fine? Okay. I'm going to have another video for you next week. I think it's a little bit better. It's a little longer, but there's some informative videos in there that I think you'll enjoy. we're moving into Hellenistic theater. Athens during the time remained the center of Greek theater. It's important to note that as we think back on the Greece's golden age, Athens at that time was a very big deal in the theater scene. Writers produced comedies instead of tragedies. These comedies are known as Greek New Comedy. Now, I get this is going to be confusing, but when we think of comedies, we're not thinking like, ha ha, yay, or tragedies where the character dies at the end. That's not entirely what these comedies were like. Instead of poking fun at political leaders, these plays told stories of love and relationship involving regular people, just like the statues and sculptures, these were more realistic during the Hellenistic time. Kind of a theme of the Hellenistic era. Menander. He was the best known playwright of the Hellenistic era. That's how I'd ID him. Does anybody remember how many plays that Menander wrote? Go ahead.
1,000?
Dial it back a little bit. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry. Sorry?
100.
Yeah, 108. Liam, do you remember how many festival prizes he won?
8.
Exactly. The significance of Menander's work would be that it influenced the development of European comedy during the Renaissance. As mentioned by Jessica and Liam, during his lifetime he would write 108 comedies and win 8 festival prizes. Does anybody need more time before we move on? Okay. You guys just let me know. Here's your timeline and you are ready to go. Good in the back? Just need those over time. Okay, you're fine. Awesome, thank you. Thank you all for being respectful while other people are working. I appreciate that. But right now we're going to talk about some of the great thinkers and their philosophies and how their followers view things. Now this section right here is very important, and if you're going to pay attention to really anything, it's these two people that I'm about to mention. I see a lot of times where people are missing points because they're mixing these two up. Epicurus. He was a Greek philosopher who founded the philosophy known as Epicureanism. I'm getting there. He believed finding happiness was the goal of life, and he believed the way to be happy was to avoid pain. Furthermore, followers of him avoided worry, limiting their wants and lived simply. Pleasure to them meant spending time with friends. Of course, that means in 2020 they would struggle with being quarantined and not seeing their friends, following social distance. you to take away from Epicurus and Epicureanism is that they avoided worry. They wanted to live simply, and worry was not going to be the way for them. They also believed to be happy was to avoid pain. Those are the main things I want you to take away from it. Okay, if you guys struggle to spell these philosophies on the test, I understand. I have been struggling all day to say philosophy. It's very difficult. But as long as you were in the ballpark, we are always going to count it. Does anybody need a little bit more time? Cool. Would anybody like any more time? You good? I get it, it can be a little hard to see in the back. I will try to increase font size with the next keynote for you. It's also worth mentioning that this keynote will be put up in your modules at some point soon. It's not in there now, but I know that a lot of you guys study from your keynote, so it will be up there. The other great thinker of the time was a man named Zeno, a Phoenician thinker who developed the philosophy Stoicism. Now, Stoics claim that people who were guided by their emotions lived unhappy. To them, happiness could be found by using reason. Unlike the Epicureans, Stoics thought people had a duty to serve their community. Also worth mentioning that Stoic ideas would later influence a lot of great Roman thinkers. Does anybody need any more time? Okay. Our next scientist is Aristophanes. He served as the chief librarian at the Library of Alexandria. If you've watched the video, you'll know I had a big video inside of there that talked about what he discovered. Does anybody remember? Yeah, Lena? Do you remember how he figured that out.
2 sticks, and you saw the shadows, very different.
Yeah, exactly. So what Aristophanes concluded was that Earth was round, and he gained that knowledge from measuring the Earth's circumference. How he did that? He had heard that on the summer solstice in Syene, that the sun cast no shadow. So he said, well, I want to try this out in Alexandria. Putting a stick in Alexandria, he found out that it was casting a shadow to 83 degrees, meaning there was a 7-degree difference in the shadow cast. To him, that didn't make a lot of sense, and the only thing that he could figure out from that was that, well, the Earth must be round. And, yeah, go ahead.
How did they figure out that it was like angles? Like, how did they know like the exact angles?
So by sticking the stick in the ground, what they would do is just, they already knew the math behind angles.
Yeah.
And so this would, essentially, if it was straight down, then you would be looking at a 90-degree angle. As it went out further, you would then measure the distance of that angle and subtract it from 90 degrees, and that gave them a difference of 7 degrees.
Oh.
Essentially, if we imagine the Earth is flat and all things are perfect on the summer solstice, then in Alexandria and Syene, the shadows should have been both 90 degrees. And that's kind of what gave him the inkling that, all right, the Earth must be round. And he was actually really close. It was, to the actual measurement, it was about 180-something miles off, which is incredible for the time when you think about the technology they had compared to what we have now. Does anybody need more time? Move a little bit quicker through this guy. His name is Eucalypt. Euclid is considered the most famous mathematician of the Hellenistic era, and is also known as the father of geometry. He described something that is called plane geometry, and did so in his book, Elements. Essentially what plane geometry shows is how points, lines, angles, and surfaces relate to one another. As you move through your academic career, you now know who you can blame for all the pain that is geometry class.
That's why he looks sad because of math.
Yes.
He looks sad because of math. Don't we all? You need math. I'm kidding. A little bit. Not really. Sorry, Mr. Burke.
Just a refresher, for IDing Euclid, we would say he's the most famous mathematician of the Hellenistic era. And significance, described plane geometry, essentially came up with geometry. Does anybody need more time? See if that student has a lead. You may want to check on there to see if it's accidentally deleted the apps, and then see if it allows you to reinstall them. Last but not least of the great Hellenistic scientists, we have Archimedes. The most famous scientist of the Hellenistic era, Archimedes was a mathematician, a physicist, an engineer, an inventor, and an astronomer. It was essentially all the things that the other scientists we touched on were. He studied ball-like shapes that we call spheres, and tube-like shapes that we call cylinders. And by doing so, and studying them, he was able to figure out the value of pi. I will airdrop you my keynote when we're done so that you can fill those notes in. And just try to stay along as much as you can. He would go on to develop machinery and weapons of war, such as the catapult and lever, a heat ray, and the Archimedes screw. And at the end of the video lesson I made for you guys, I thought it was important and kind of interesting to include the Archimedes screw. As I did my research on all these people, it was something I had heard of but wasn't completely familiar with. And so I found it very interesting watching that video, and I hope you guys did too. The best real-world example I can give you of the Archimedes screw is if you guys know the sewage treatment plant that's over by the Humane Society. You can kind of see an Archimedes screw in action, pulling up the sewage and water. With like a little bit more time. Yeah. Do we need any more time? So I'm going to wrap things up for you real quick. Essentially, the four kingdoms that formed from Alexander's empire shared and spread Hellenistic culture throughout. However, these kingdoms would not ever be able to work together and often fought wars with each other. While all these wars were going on, we had another power that was slowly growing stronger.
Staff at 2:08, we're going to release the bus riders first. They need to take their shields back to their first period class, and then they may go out to get on the bus. Once again, bus riders, please release them at 2:08. Please hold your car riders. We will make an announcement for them to leave at 2:15. Once again, please hold your car riders. We'll release them at 2:15. Thank you.
Hold on.
Okay, we'll just jump to the homework real quick so you know. You have in your modules a true and false worksheet. You guys have done this before. The true and false, if the statement is true, mark it as true. If the statement is false, mark it as false and identify what part of the sentence is false. Now here's what I would do to save you time. Figure out what's false and correct it in that section in a way that makes it true, and then write the sentence again. You can rewrite the entire sentence different if you feel like it, but it will save you time if you just correct that spot and then rewrite the sentence. That is due on Sunday at 10 p.m. Like I said, the keynote will be put up at some point. That's what I will hear about you.
Mr. Robinson. Hold on, gonna clean up. Gonna clean on. Mr. Bird, will you grab the stylus for me? Okay, what did they say? Bus riders, go ahead. Bus riders, go ahead. We'll take care of your desk. Bus riders, go. Car riders, stay. Wherever you put your, what's making you just shield just.